Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to the World Over Live. The elections are over. President Barack Obama has earned a second term in the White House. What does this mean for the Catholic Church, which has been locked in a battle with the current administration over that HHS mandate? Author and theologian George Weigel joins us for an election wrap. And later, much has been made of the war on women and women's issues in this year's campaign. Here to give us her perspective on the role of women voters is Colleen Campbell. She's also author of the new book, My Sisters, the Saints, a spiritual memoir about her journey of faith and the 6 women who mentored her along the way. I want you to be part of the program, so get your calls and emails in now, particularly those post-election questions. The number, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. and internationally 205-271-2980, or drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get things started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. The balance of power in Washington, D.C. remains unchanged as President Barack Obama won re-election with a solid victory over Republican nominee Mitt Romney on Tuesday. The president swept every swing state in the contest. The Democrats added to their majority in the Senate, while the GOP held the majority in the House. Since Tuesday, both sides have offered to move beyond the legislative gridlock of the past 2 years and start anew. House Speaker John Boehner on Wednesday called on the president to lead on fiscal matters, including the severe automatic tax increases and budget cuts that will take effect at the end of the year if Congress and the president fail to act. Our post-election wrap is straight ahead, and we'll take your calls. And that much talked about Catholic swing vote once again mirrored that of the entire electorate. Exit polls indicate that President Obama won the Catholic vote 50% to 48%. That's the same percentage by which the president won the election. Regular churchgoers among all faith groups went for Romney 59 to 39%. The infrequent church-going faithful supported the president 62% to 34%. Also of note, the Catholic vote is shrinking. 1/4 of the 2012 electorate was Catholic, down 2 points from 2008. And white, non-Hispanic Catholic voters continued their steady decline. Over the past several elections, they comprised just 18% of the 2012 electorate. And after more than 30 defeats across the United States dating back to the 1990s, for the first time, same-sex marriage won support by a popular vote. Voters in Maryland, Maine, and Washington state approved measures legalizing gay marriage. Also, Minnesota rejected a constitutional amendment defining marriage as a homosexual union. The state's heterosexual union, rather. The state statutes, however, already define marriage as such. Chair of the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Marriage, San Francisco Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone, said the results were disappointing. He said no matter what policy, law, or judicial decision is put into place, marriage is the only institution that unites a man and a woman to each other. It is either this or it is nothing at all. End quote. 9 states and the District of Columbia now allow same-sex couples to wed. 39 states have explicitly prohibited such unions. Some other ballot initiatives of note from Tuesday's elections. Massachusetts voters narrowly rejected physician-assisted suicide following a significant campaign against it by the bishops of that state. Californians decided not to repeal the state's death penalty law. Montana has approved parental notification for abortion, while Florida rejected a similar measure that would have placed restrictions on taxpayer-funded abortion. And a very different type of election took place in Egypt on Sunday. The Coptic Orthodox Church chose its new leader. Bishop Tawadros was selected in an elaborate and solemn ceremony whereby a blindfolded boy randomly drew his name from among 3 candidates. Bishop Tawadros will be ordained Pope II, Tawadros II, on November 18th. Difficulties for the new patriarch and the minority Christian population in Egypt surfaced almost immediately. Asia News reported that on Monday, more than 100 Salafists wielding sticks and rods occupied church land in Cairo for more than a day. They erected a sign reading Al-Rama Mosque, which they placed up front. Following his election, the new patriarch objected to the plans to include Sharia law in Egypt's yet-to-be-written constitution. He's promised Christian opposition. And on Wednesday, Pope Benedict announced that the Vatican has dropped plans for a high-level papal delegation mission to Syria. Vatican officials confirmed plans were abandoned because of concerns that the mission could complicate the delicate political situation in Syria and concerns over the safety of that delegation. Instead, a delegation will be sent to neighboring Lebanon to coordinate relief efforts for Syrian refugees and those needing help inside the country. Pope Benedict again appealed to all parties in Syria to spare no efforts in the search for peace. And U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Miguel Diaz, this week announced that he is returning to academic life. Mr. Diaz was appointed to the position in 2009 by President Obama. The American envoy met with Pope Benedict for a farewell visit earlier this week before leaving Rome. He's headed to the University of Dayton. No word yet on who the White House might replace him with as the Vatican ambassador. And one of the largest churches in the world opened this past week in Sao Paulo, Brazil. The inaugural Mass for the Mother of God Sanctuary was celebrated with an overflow crowd of some 50,000 faithful. When completed, the church structure will hold approximately 20,000 worshipers. Father Marcelo Rossi, the Grammy-nominated Christian music singer and one of Brazil's most famous priests, is the driving force behind the project. Father Rossi, whose charismatic style has drawn crowds Joel Osteen would appreciate, said he built the church to battle what recent studies indicate is Catholicism's biggest enemy, indifference. Brazil has the world's largest Catholic population. In recent decades, millions have left the church, either joining the country's rapidly expanding evangelical movement or not practicing their faith at all. And recovery continues for victims of Superstorm Sandy. On Sunday in Breezy Point, Queens, Brooklyn Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio joined hundreds of parishioners at St. Thomas More Church for a candlelight mass, since the church was without electricity. During his homily, Bishop DiMarzio applauded the faithful for braving the storm, and although there is no timetable for rebuilding, he encouraged parishioners not to abandon hope. Breezy Point suffered heavy flooding and massive fire that destroyed several blocks. Efforts by Catholic Charities are well underway for those affected by Superstorm Sandy to offer financial assistance for the victims. Catholic Charities USA is accepting donations at catholiccharitiesusa.org. When we return, papal biographer George Weigel joins us to talk about the outcome of the 2012 election, and he'll take your calls when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. The 2012 elections are over in the United States, but not the consequences. To discuss the implications of a second Obama term, the big winners and losers, and what this means to the Catholics of the United States and beyond, is the senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and the author of the book, The End and the Beginning, Pope John Paul II, The Victory of Freedom, The Last Years, The Legacy, George Weigel. Great to have you back on the show.
Raymond, good to see you.
Let's talk about this Catholic vote, how it broke down. Overall, the Catholic vote went 50% for President Obama, 49% for Mitt Romney. What does this tell us about Catholics and their voting habits?
I think it tells us exactly what you and I discussed 2 weeks ago, Raymond. If you disaggregate those numbers and ask, how did people who are regularly in church vote? 58%, 58% of Catholics voted for Governor Romney. And it was the non-church attending Catholic vote that pushed the president up to 50% of the total Catholic vote. I suspect that this is exactly the same as that you would find among white Protestant voters in the United States. So as you and I discussed 2 weeks ago, it's not that there's a Catholic vote and a Protestant vote. There's a pious vote or a church attending vote or an Orthodox Christian vote, and there is a baptized pagan vote. That's the distinction, and that has been the case for the last 6 presidential cycles. So there's no news here, it seems to me. What this does suggest is that any effort to move Catholic voters towards a political position that is more congruent with what, for example, the bishops of the United States were emphasizing this past year, has got to begin with fundamental catechesis. We've got a lot of uncatechized but self-identified Catholics in the United States.
Well, that is what it seems to indicate to me. There aren't a lot of Catholics listening. I mean, half of the Catholics are not listening at all to what the bishops are saying and what they presumably heard from many pulpits, though not all. What is the takeaway for the bishops of the United States, politically speaking? The bishops got out in front and in the middle of a political campaign.
I think there are 2 takeaways from this. The first is that we have to summon Catholics back to a more active practice of the faith. People didn't hear what the bishops were saying or what their pastors were saying if they're not in church. So I think a summons to a more regular practice of the faith is urgent. As far as the bishops as a body are concerned, and they'll be meeting next week in Baltimore, the message, it seems to me, has to be a united statement to the administration: rescind the mandate. We're not interested in playing Monty Hall, let's make a deal here. We're interested in rescission, because only rescission addresses the fundamental offense against religious freedom represented by the HHS mandate.
This is a big question. We're hearing about this on email and Twitter, and we have a lot of calls lined up, and the primary question they want to ask is about the HHS mandate. I want to play a little bite. This is the Attorney General of Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli, talking about the HHS mandate, how it came to be, and the implications. Listen to this, and then I want your reaction, George.
There are religious liberty challenges that are working their way through the courts to the HHS mandate from last January, and that is now set to go into effect in August. So you're going to see a real clash between this administration and a number of the churches of this country when they essentially try to shove this policy that is contrary to their faith, including my Catholic faith, upon these churches. And that's going to create a confrontation. And of course, the administration intentionally set that up last year as part of their election strategy. But now the rubber meets the road, and everybody has to deal with it.
2 questions here. What is next? What do you expect from the bishops and the faithful vis-a-vis this HHS mandate and the relationship with the Obama administration?
The lawsuits are working their way through the federal courts. There was a good result on this at the district court level just the day before the election. I still believe that our position, that the HHS mandate violates both the First Amendment and the 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act, will be vindicated at the end of the process, which will undoubtedly be at the Supreme Court. That may take another year, so there are going to be real pressures on Catholic employers and Catholic institutions before this is finally sorted out. Yeah. But the signal that has to be sent from the bishops next week is, we are not interested in some mythical 50-yard line. This can only be rescinded, and then we can talk about the future beyond.
But George, there's no political leverage. If anything, what this has revealed, and I've spoken to people involved with the Obama administration and who've been part of this whole HHS effort, what they say now is, if anything, this shows the bishops don't have the sway over the people they thought they had. Therefore, half of the Catholics embrace what Obama's trying to do here.
Well, that's irrelevant to the legal argument. The legal argument is going to go forward, and I believe the position that the mandate is unconstitutional and illegal will be vindicated in the courts, and the administration will lose that battle.
What do you make of the reports? Ken Cuccinelli referenced it there, but there have been published reports that the Obama administration and their election team crafted a strategy, and they did it last year, to pick a fight with the Catholic hierarchy, to rouse their own base, particularly single women who were decisive to their victory, and to create tension, if you will, in the church to divide that Catholic vote.
I have no direct personal knowledge of that. It wouldn't surprise me in the least. But given the deep secularist cast of mind of the administration, it wouldn't have required an election strategy for them to attempt to turn Catholic institutions and Catholic employers into delivery vehicles for the Department of Health and Human Services. They didn't need the excuse of an election to do that. They want to do that anyway because they don't believe in an America in which private voluntary associations play a large part in our national life.
If you have a question for George, the number 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S., internationally 205-271-2980, and I already see your emails at worldover@EWTN.com. We will get to them momentarily. What do you think, when it's all written, how will people interpret the bishops' clear messaging throughout this campaign? I mean, for the first time in many, many a decade, you had all the bishops of the U.S. coming out and making such clear statements, but they were largely written statements, George. They weren't explicated, except for Bishop Laurie and Bishop Paprocki and maybe a few others. This was basically a written campaign. They came out, they issued the statement, and then everybody went back to the chancery. Was that the way to wage a battle over this sort of volatile issue in the public square?
Two points on that. If you look at the statement of the bishops of Pennsylvania, the statements of the bishops of Wisconsin, there was a lot of state-level activity of, I think, an unprecedented sort. But finally, Raymond, this is not the bishop's responsibility. It's the laity's responsibility. And it's not the laity's responsibility to simply take orders. It's the responsibility of the laity to go out and convert the world. If every convinced Catholic had taken on the responsibility to convince 20, 30, or 40 other less than wholly convinced Catholics that this was a watershed election and that the re-election of the administration would create real trouble for the church, there might have been a different outcome. So it's time for lay Catholics to take the initiative that is rightly theirs by baptism to be the agents of the church in the public square.
Many people are asking here, they're saying this is, this is a question of cafeteria Catholics clashing with Orthodox Catholics. And again, so many people, I think, they're looking for a place to vent their rage. If anything, to my eye, one can always say the bishop should have done this, should have done that. But as you said, this is the laity's purview. It's really their responsibility. And did the bishops overstep their responsibility or confuse it by getting involved so directly and by Cardinal Dolan, for instance, being the point of contact with the administration, rather than appointing lay people or coordinating with lay people and saying, you guys go deal with this?
I don't think so. I mean, the General Council of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Anthony Piccarello, is a very committed, deeply catechized, very legally smart layman.
Yeah.
He's been the point guy in dealing with the administration, which of course doesn't want to be dealt with on this. It is ideologically dug in. That is why we are now at the stage where this is going to be resolved through the federal courts. Now, it's a shame that we have to spend time and resources doing that, but the ultimate result of this I am reasonably confident is going to be a vindication of a robust concept of religious freedom as constitutionally guaranteed and a rebuke to the administration.
Was it a mistake for Mitt Romney to not speak more forcefully on this issue of religious liberty? And was he too shy generally about the social issues? His team seemed to have a push-away strategy.
Yeah, I think they had a don't scare the horses strategy, which was, to my mind, not a good idea. I think the Republican strategy should have begun with the premise, stated time and again, this is a failed administration. And one of the things on which it failed most grievously was the protection of religious freedom, and any attempt to build a culture of life in the United States. Yeah. Quite the opposite was the administration policy. I don't see why we can't talk about these things more intelligently.
Yeah. There's also the critique today that the Republicans have an ever-shrinking white, old, married base, and that's all there is. How do they expand that, and is that the reality?
Well, I think this election, as I wrote in National Review Online today, reveals some very disturbing facts about our political culture, not the least
and demographic
of which,
changes.
Not the least of which is that there are now an enormous percentage of people who are dependent upon government for income and for entitlement support. This is not the America of 40 or 50 years ago, and that's a real problem. That's a real problem. The breakdown of the marriage culture in the United States is clearly a huge, not simply social problem, but predisposes people to a dependency on government that leans them in one direction politically.
I want to get to the phones before we continue talking. Nancy from Illinois, what's your question, Nancy?
Hello, how are you this evening?
Good.
Very good.
Go ahead.
You know, my question is this: I have done exactly what George has said. I'm I guess you call a revert of 24 years, and that's all I use my Facebook for, is posting what the bishops have had to say for the last year and a half. And my question to you, George, is this: I'm not hearing it from the pulpit. I'm not. I hear it on the, through my my link with the Catholic bishops and stuff, but I'm not hearing it from the pulpit. I'm not.
I'm sorry that's the case. I do know that the bishops of Illinois wrote and distributed 4 weeks' worth of bulletin inserts that I happened to have a chance to review and see, that I thought were quite good and quite pointed and raised up the urgency of religious freedom. I think finally, as important as the social network, social media side of this is, it's got to be one-to-one. We've got to talk to people in our parishes, our neighborhoods, our families who don't get it, and help them to understand what is involved in the struggle for life in the United States and for the struggle for freedom in the United States.
As somebody who's been watching this from so many angles, George, it seems to me there's a communication problem. It is what damned Mitt Romney at the end of the day. He could not clearly articulate that natural law argument, that convincing argument for why not only the political principles he held, but these important issues to religious voters. He couldn't communicate them. It seems to me the priests and even our bishops have the same problem. They're great on the written page, but we're no longer a literate culture. Isn't that what we're dealing with here? And Barack Obama, people can say what they want about him. He's a great communicator, and he communicates clearly, simply, and he obviously reached people and resonated with them. Is that the problem?
It's part of the problem. I mean, we had 2 Senate races, one in Indiana and one in Missouri, which should have been won by pro-life candidates who simply didn't know how to talk the talk. And it's inconceivable to me why they didn't. Why these people don't go to colleagues, friends, who can help them articulate a rational, defensible, public pro-life position is just beyond my imagining. You know you're going to be hit with these questions.
Right.
You know you're going to be hit with the hard cases. Here's how you respond to that, and yet they don't do it.
And the only person in this campaign that really did it beautifully and was cut off in the middle of his explanation was Paul Ryan, who did a great job during that debate with Biden. But as he went to make the full case, they cut off and turned gears on him. But
well, I think this is one of the things this is one of the takeaways from this election, is that Congressman Ryan has become the public face of an informed, intelligent, public Catholicism in America. And this is going to have a telling effect over time.
Let's go to the phones. Mariana, you're in Maryland. What's your question?
Yes, sir. Hello. Thank you so much for EWTN, and thank you so much for doing everything you did about spreading the word about John Paul II. He's the reason I'm a Catholic, and it's because I listened to what all of you said. So my question is, I'm a teacher, and I work in the county school systems, and I'm very concerned because now that same-sex unions have been passed, it's only a heartbeat away from getting into the public school systems. It's already in Montgomery County. The curriculum has already been introduced into Montgomery County, but not completely, not all over Maryland. Now that it's law, it's just a heartbeat away. What do Roman Catholics who are devout do when we're put into this situation?
Good question, Mariana. We should talk about this. 3 ballot initiatives where the gay marriage was voted on. They passed for the first time. What does this represent, and what is the faithful Catholic in the position of Mariana in a public school setting to do?
I think as Mariana evidently teaches in the county in which I live, so I'm very sympathetic to her concerns. I think you try to fight this as long as you can within that system. And then you have to consider the possibility of working in another school setting. There was a lot of smoke blown about this Maryland initiative and how no one was going to be forced to do anything that violated their conscientious convictions. Well, we've just heard that's not quite the case here. So it seems to me that teachers like Mariana need to try to press the argument for their conscience rights as far as they can with their union or with their employers in the Montgomery County School Board. But if they can't do it, then finally they're going to have to make a very difficult decision. And perhaps their experience can help others understand the gravity of this situation. This is exactly what Benedict XVI means by the dictatorship of relativism. The imposition of a relativistic morality by coercive state power that tells public school teachers, you must now present the Adam and Steve wedding as the utter equivalent of the Adam and Eve wedding.
Now,
that's a problem.
Many of my media colleagues, I've been talking to them over the last few days, their takeaway from this election is it is time not only for the Republican Party, but for the hierarchy of the Catholic Church to admit the culture has moved on, the culture has changed, and they should really drop all of these social issues, the things you're talking about, whether it's gay marriage, opposition to gay marriage, whether it's this HHS mandate revolt. No one's listening to you, George. And they say to win, the only way forward is to drop this stuff and stick to just an economic message of conservatism or, or a different approach.
This happens every 4 years. It's not going to be the advice that's taken. What the Republican Party, what the conservative part of the American political spectrum needs to do is learn how to argue these positions more intelligently. As I said some weeks ago after the vice presidential debate, we need to lift up constantly in the pro-life debate the tremendous work done by crisis pregnancy centers who offer women in crisis something more than a technological fix, which we know from the data has damaging effects on that woman for the rest of her life. We need to lift up the compassion and care of the pro-life movement every bit as much as the rational arguments for why the pro-life position is the true democratic, small d, the true human rights position in this debate.
people here on the emails in general, George, many of them are expressing concern and confusion because they want to know, we've got this HHS mandate that is going to come to pass if the courts don't intervene. One person here said, given John Roberts' take on the health care bill in general, what confidence do you have that this HHS mandate will be thrown out by that same Supreme Court?
Because the Supreme Court this past January rebuffed an attempt by the Obama administration to compel a Protestant congregation in Michigan to hire people that it thought were inappropriate for its school, I believe it was in that case, this Hosanna Tabor case. 9-0, the Supreme Court upheld the so-called ministerial exemption to equal employment opportunity law. That same argument, or a very parallel argument, can be made on the mandate, that this is a gross intrusion of state authority into the integrity of a religious institution. So I think we're going to be vindicated on this as well. My colleague Ed Whalen, who knows as much about the Supreme Court as anybody, thinks we're going to win 9-0 on this Supreme Court. But there is going to be a mess for Catholic employers and Catholic institutions.
Well, that's the question. That's the other part of the
between now and then.
What do people do? They say, look, I'm a faithful Catholic. I wanted to obey the law and also follow the dictates of the church. What should I do?
I think we're going to have to talk about this a lot more over the next few months as the mandate begins to come into effect. There's no way to simply talk about that right now.
What should be, give me your take before we go, the winners and losers here. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? I mean, aside from the candidates themselves.
I am a great friend and fan of Cardinal Dolan of New York, who I think has led the bishops through this year as no one else could possibly have done. Archbishop Laurie of Baltimore has emerged as a very, very strong defender of religious freedom and a very articulate defender of religious freedom. Congressman Ryan, I mentioned, seems to me to have become a new public face of the church and a new and impressive interpreter of Catholic social doctrine. I find the most depressing part of this year, if you want to call it losers, to be the inability of the Catholic left to defend religious freedom, which was the great progressive Catholic or liberal Catholic contribution to the Universal Church at the Second Vatican Council. The refusal to defend what that part of the church had given the world church as a great gift, trading religious freedom for the Obama administration, was a deeply depressing affair.
I asked this question earlier of viewers, and some of the responses we got of winners and losers, they thought the winners were the nuns on the bus and the Catholic left, and that they outflanked the bishops. You would say what?
Nobody's going to remember the nuns on the bus, which was a total freak show.
Well, it was really a bus with a couple of nuns.
It's a bus with a couple of very nice old elderly ladies on it who are going to be completely forgotten in 2 months and who were in fact brutally used by the Obama campaign. And I don't see how a Catholic left that cannot make a coherent argument for religious freedom can be considered the winner of anything, except perhaps the award for political malleability, which is not necessarily a good thing to be awarded.
Let's talk for a moment about something. I saw Phil Lawler wrote this the other day. I just want your reaction. He said, this is a decisive defeat for the culture of life. Expand on that idea and what this means beyond who's sitting in Congress and in the White House.
I think the pro-life movement is in a remarkably strong position, although it's hard to see that right now. There are now 30 Republican governors. That ought to give the pro-life movement the opportunity to do serious state-level legislative work over the next several years. And we know that, for example, more closely regulating the abortion industry drives down the absolute numbers of abortion in a locality. So there's room to work there. Nothing has changed in the fact that the pro-life movement is growing larger and younger, and the people who oppose a culture of life are getting grayer and in some respects fewer. Now, what has not happened is to translate this into national political action of an effective sort. And here, what is crucial will be any Supreme Court changes over the next 4 years. The possibility that this administration would be able to replace, for example, a Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court.
How about a Kennedy?
The Kennedy vote could help lock in a 5-member pro-Roe versus Wade majority, and that is going to have to be very, very hardly and aggressively fought at the time of a possible nomination.
So you reject this idea that all this election did was maintain the status quo. In your recent piece, you say anything but. Run us through the huge changes that this election
I think
ensures.
it registered up changes that we may have suspected were there before. This question of are we approaching a tipping point where such a high percentage of people in the country are dependent on government for direct income or through public service unions, that we are ineluctably moving towards the kind of welfare state that has proven itself fiscally impossible in Europe. I am afraid that the re-election of this administration and its fecklessness in dealing with threats to global security has made the likelihood of a war in the Middle East to forestall Iranian nuclear weapons all the more probable. I think the pro-life cause has taken a serious hit, although we will come back and we will continue to press the case. We are going to have to fight this religious freedom battle to the end, whereas a change of administration might have meant an end to Obamacare. And the locking in of Obamacare, it seems to me, is deeply, deeply troubling from a long-term point of view. The Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Geithner, said sometime in, I believe it was late 2011, we don't know how this is going to be paid for 20, 30, 40 years down the line. Now, how one can say that responsibly is just
But once again, don't you fault Mitt Romney and his campaign for that? They did not draw that bright line. We didn't talk about the taxes that are going up under Obamacare, the rights that will be taken from people and given to a bureaucracy behind us to make health and intimate decisions about our future care. I mean, it seems to me that picture was never painted because there was this play to these independents that didn't break his way, incidentally, in the final analysis.
I think the failure to sharpen the contradictions, to heighten the contradictions, to heighten the differences, I should say, and to put this in terms of intergenerational moral responsibility. Do you think it's appropriate to leave your grandchildren a mountain of certainly unpayable and perhaps unserviceable debt? That's a real problem.
I'm going to go to this. This is a quick email, but it reflects so many that we've been getting in. So I'll use this as a representative. This is from C. Tate in Salem, South Carolina. I just heard Mr. Weigel say he believes the laity is responsible for catechizing wayward Catholics. I disagree. We recently left a parish because our priest was not on board with the bishop. How do we address that when our own clergy and nuns don't support the message of the bishop?
Well, the first thing that Mr. Tate needs to do is write the Bishop of Charleston and express his grave dissatisfaction with what the priest in question did, explain why he and his wife have left the parish, and ask for a serious response from the bishop. Now, there are plenty of good priests and good parishes in South Carolina, including my friend Father Scott Newman in Greenville, South Carolina, who runs what I have happily said is the best parish in the United States. So there are lots of options. But lay Catholics who are not being given what they deserve in terms of being fed by their shepherds need to make that known to the bishop of the diocese.
Very good. George Weigel, thanks for being here and
Thanks,
unpacking
Raymond.
all of this for us.
Okay.
George's book, The End and the Beginning, Pope John Paul II, The Victory of Freedom, The Last Years, The Legacy, is available in paperback at bookstores everywhere and online. He's also got a great book of essays. I'll link all of that on RaymondArroyo.com. When we return, Colleen Carroll Campbell is here to discuss the women's vote in this election and tell us about her new book and her sisters, the Saints. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. It is often when we are confused or at our lowest points when we seek spiritual guidance and inspiration. People go to all sorts of places for that inspiration, forgetting the incredible rich history and legacy of those who have gone before us, specifically the saints. My next guest rediscovered their example and found light for her own path. She's the host of EWTN's Faith and Culture, a former speechwriter for George W. Bush, and author of the new book, My Sisters, the Saints, a spiritual memoir. We welcome, after a long absence, a decade-long absence, Colleen Carroll Campbell back to the show. Great to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. Don't let 10 years elapse before the next time. I'll be, you'll have to come dig me up at a cemetery somewhere. Now, I want to start with, put your political hat on.
All right.
I need your take on this, the vote and the way that women voted in this election. It is being given a lot of attention. 29% of married women went with, 29% of the electorate, which is married women, tilted toward Romney, 53 to 46%, a 7-point margin. But the unmarried women went 66% toward Barack Obama. How to interpret that? What does that mean?
Well, I'm glad we're at least making that distinction this year, because in prior years we often haven't. It's just the women's vote, but it's sort of like the Catholic vote. It's rather meaningless if you don't look at the marriage gap and, of course, also the religion gap. Again, the weekly church-going women. And if you combine weekly churchgoer with married, you've got, in most cases, someone who's looking toward the pro-life candidate versus the one who supports abortion rights. So, I think still, though, if you look at this gap, that 7-point margin that Mitt Romney enjoyed, I mean, that's a huge enthusiasm gap. And I think, as George pointed out earlier, there is this growth of the social welfare state is quite attractive when you're dealing with the consequences of marital and family breakdown, or, when you're sort of a single woman out there in the world and you're not sure there's ever going to be really that family to support you. So I think this is, again, a reminder to us that at the end of the day, culture is upstream from politics, and religious worldview is upstream from that, and that's where we need to do our real work. Why are married people becoming a minority in the United States, and why are unmarried women looking to government rather than the private sector and their faith for support?
And themselves. Now, let's talk about also, there seems to also have been a racial divide here. The rap being even Hispanic Catholics broke for President Obama in huge numbers. Was that a problem because of who you were running, or is this something deeper?
Well, I think there are some real problems with the way that Republicans talk about the issue of immigration. I think particularly in the primary season, just as I think there are problems with some of these other issues, I think the philosophy of limited government and the philosophy of having strong, secure borders, but also welcoming, as Catholics, we're called to really have that sense of embracing the stranger. That doesn't mean it's a free-for-all, but I've often been uncomfortable as a Catholic, sometimes listening to the way immigration is discussed and the way Latinos are discussed by the Republican Party, and I think this is just a reminder that that's a huge issue. But of course, the issue is also, again, educating Catholics about the primacy of the life issues, which we need to put before other considerations.
Well, remember during the primaries, Newt Gingrich was making this point that we can't send a grandmother who's been here for 25 years, just send her packing. Something's got to be done here. But Romney, to position himself, took a harder line, and that boxed him in the general election. Big mistake.
I think so. I think so. And you can't etch a sketch. I mean, people are paying attention during a primary season that's getting that much coverage.
But see, I reject this idea, though, that somehow, people have been saying all day on cable, you've got to field more black candidates, more Hispanic candidates, more. Mia Love lost her race. She's a black woman in Utah. Alan West, who is an articulate war veteran, strong conservative guy, Christian guy, he lost his race, too. They're both black African Americans. It's not just who you run. It's really, it seems to me it's much larger than that. And it's about articulating that message and connecting with those people who traditionally, the Republican Party anyways, had a problem reaching out to.
And I think the same goes for women. We need to be cultivating these women leaders at a very early stage at the state legislature level, rather than waiting till we're on the national scene and hurry up, let's find a woman to run.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk for a moment about your book, My Sisters, the Saints. What prompted you to write this? Because it's both a memoir and a spiritual book, a devotional in some ways.
In some ways, yes. I was very interested in Pope John Paul II's call for a new feminism. I began working on a book kind of articulating that and writing about especially Edith Stein and John Paul's writings on those subjects. But as I went around the country talking as I'm writing the book, I noticed women were really hungering more for stories, and I realized that, too, was the way I was feeling. And I realized as I look back at my own journey over trying to figure out what it means to be a liberated woman, again and again, the people in my life who stepped forward and showed me that were the women saints. And I finally realized I really couldn't tell the story of these truths without telling how I came to learn them, which is trial and error and plenty of stumbles along the way, but getting to know these 6 phenomenal women.
Yeah, and we'll walk through them in a moment. But when I read it, I came away with a new appreciation of that tension. And I do think it's a modern problem for women. The tension between wanting to live your values and your faith in the world and yet feeling the tug of looking perfect, having the kids early, success, got to fill up that resume. And you really paint that internal tug of war well. How pronounced is that and was that? And where did you see reflections of that in the journeys of these saints?
Well, I was feeling a lot of that even in my college years. In this book, My Sisters, the Saints, is a 15-year journey, but it opens in my college years. And just that sense of emptiness after doing sort of the work hard, play hard. You're racing to build your resume by day. You're trying to engage in the campus party culture at night, and then you're trying to be a good Catholic and check off the box every Sunday by getting to the drive-through Mass, which is what we called the half-hour one that I was still habitually late for.
Going to the hospital again, huh? Hospital chapel. Go ahead.
And in the midst of this, I felt a profound emptiness, and I think it is an emptiness that has surfaced for many women at all different points in life, a sense of, is this all there is? And of course, I don't think that's only an issue for women, but I think it is especially, in some sense, one right now. And Teresa of Avila spoke to me in that. Here is a woman who was a bold reformer, a doctor of the church, and yet someone who struggled a great deal with these same worldly pressures and concern. I mean, she was almost 40 before her real conversion sort of took. And when it did take, she didn't sort of become a wilting violet. She maintained her boldness, but it became a holy boldness. And I could relate to her. She was so earthy and real and liberated in a sense in which I hadn't seen that sort of liberation from my secular feminist philosophy professors or pop culture heroines either.
I love, there's also a blessed, an almost saint that emerges here, but it's a man. And it spoke to me because it's set in New Orleans. You and your husband go to New Orleans, and you go to the Francis Selos Shrine, Blessed Selos, and you pray there for what?
For children. And, like many women, I, got married and was on board with the church's teaching about welcoming children, but there's a lot of anxiety when you're a woman with a career and you're trying to figure out how all of this is going to work. And so that was really a moment of my husband and I really saying, well, we're really asking God for a child, and we were sort of, great, when's this going to happen? And a year passes and another year, and we went through a very difficult journey through infertility. And in the midst of that, once again, as in my college years, I found myself dissatisfied with what I was finding in the secular culture. Women's magazines weren't speaking to me. Secular infertility chat rooms weren't telling me anything other than run off and use IVF. And in the midst of that, I found Edith Stein, whose writings on women, which she wrote when she was a woman living in the world, were so profound because they spoke of that call to spiritual motherhood that a woman can answer in any state in life, whether or not she can bear children, whether or not she's even married. And it wasn't a cliche. It was genuine and real and compelling. And it showed me a whole new way to understand myself as a woman. And she's another saint. I think such a great font of wisdom for women today.
Yeah, and the drama of trying to conceive and have your children, that's really, I mean, that's the second part of the second movement of this book is really about that, and I think so many women can relate to that.
I think that was a huge issue, and of course my father's Alzheimer's is the other sort of thread that moves through this book.
And who was the saint that took you through that?
Therese of Lisieux was really the one who helped me look at my father in a whole new way. I discovered her shortly after he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. His journey was a very long one. He was diagnosed rather young in life, and it was more than 12 years between diagnosis and death, and obviously an agonizing process for him, for my mother, for my family, for me. You know, and initially I looked at it the way the world does. You know, what good could there be in this? Can there be any blessing? But slowly, through reading Therese and through discovering that her own father battled dementia for 6 years, he had a series of paralytic strokes that brought on his dementia. But she watched this and writes with great poignancy about how agonized she was in seeing it, but also how she began to see glimmers of grace and began to see a purification process happening in him. Saw him becoming sort of conformed to the image of the crucified Christ. And as I began to put on her lens of looking at my father, I began to notice the same transformation in him. And over the years, he became, for me, a sort of living example of Therese's little way and a genuine spiritual touchstone in my life. He'd always been a great Catholic example, but he became something more in his weakness.
What do you say to people, and there are some emailing, and I'm sure you've heard this, these women are of another time. There's no connection between what they faced and what we face today, Colleen.
Well, I thought the same thing, and that's part of why I wrote this book, because I was so surprised. And, you know, I'm a slow learner, Raymond, so I was surprised again and again. You know, I met Teresa of Avila, but then, oh, Therese, what could I learn from someone who looks so fuddy-dud? And, you know, and then there was Faustina. I mean, she's even more hidden. What on earth could I learn from her? And yet it was in the midst of working in the White House that Faustina became the saint who really anchored me. So again and again, both in their writings and, of course, their example of the Blessed Mother and, of course, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, I discovered that so many of the problems that I thought were original and unique to me, and we all, I think, sometimes have this complex of thinking we're completely original, I realized these are many universal questions, and they're questions others have asked down through the ages, and these are the women who've run the race and found satisfying answers, eternally satisfying answers. So why on earth am I looking to pop culture or secular feminism only for answers when I can look to the women saints?
Just to circle the loop on this, we're getting some emails here, and they're asking about there are a number of women who really aren't all that interested in this pro-life message, in even hearing about spirituality, and that is what showed up at the polls this past week. How do you communicate that this message that is countercultural to this generation of women who obviously are not convinced at this moment?
That's right. I mean, I think a lot of women are tuning it out. They weren't raised with anything. They don't care. I think we have to meet people where they are, and that's not about changing our message or the gospel message. That's not about soft pedaling at all, as I argued in The New Faithful, my first book. But what My Sisters the Saints does is tell my story and the stories of these 6 women saints who changed my story. And I think, I took that approach because I think today people are shrugging off proofs for God, and frankly, they're bored by political arguments a lot of times, but they'll listen to a good story.
Right.
So each of us has one. And if we go out and really actually talk about, I know where you're at with that, or I can acknowledge that I too have felt that frustration with this situation. I felt this longing. I felt this tension. I've struggled with this church teaching. And here's how I began to journey journey toward a different place, and you might be interested in hearing my story. I think more women are hungry for meaning in their lives, and men too, than we realize. But we have to begin to think about evangelization as telling our story, not simply making arguments.
And doing so with passion and conviction, which you do here, and I think many could learn from your example. Colleen,
Thank you.
Carroll, Campbell, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks,
Hope you'll come back soon. The book, My Sisters, the Saints, a spiritual memoir, is available at bookstores everywhere. You can also get it through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Now, before we go, this Monday, a very special event is happening in New York City, and I want you to be a part of it. On November 12th, I'll be emceeing a concert called Voices United at the Beacon Theater on Broadway. It's a fundraiser for St. Malachy's, the Actors Chapel, and Covenant House, two Catholic groups that do so much to help the poor and needy. The concert will bring together choruses from all over the United States and abroad. Headlining the evening is the incomparable singer Linda Eder. After the show, I'm going to post a clip of Linda so you can see her in action on my Facebook and Twitter pages. She could well be one of the best vocalists in the country now. So come see a wonderful show, support an important cause. You can go to voicesunited.com for tickets. The show's on Monday, November 12th in New York at the Beacon Theater. I'll have all of the information up on my Facebook and Twitter pages, and I've linked a 20% off ticket promotion for our viewers. Don't tell everybody. Go to RaymondArroyo.com for more information. The Twitter and Facebook pages are on the left-hand side of the site. Next week, we'll bring you highlights from the annual Bishops' Conference and much more. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye now. Thank you.